The hearing of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission will come to order, and I want to thank all of you for being here today, especially our very, very distinguished panel. I know the co-chair and I, Jim McGovern, are very grateful for the expertise that you bring to this issue and to so many others like it. So thank you so very, very much. We do have an extraordinary distinguished panel of witnesses, and I will introduce them in a moment. Right now, I want to recognize that we have in the room with us today many distinguished guests, including representatives of the Armenian Embassy, leaders of the Armenian Church, of the Armenian American Organization, some of the most effective supporters and people of the Armenian community. As many of these supporters, they're not actually Armenian, but they are very supportive of those goals. They have rallied in the defense of their community, and they're taking responsibility. So I want to again thank you for the work you're doing generally, but also on behalf of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. As many of you know, as the Soviet Union collapsed and the Armenian and Azerbaijan were among those countries emerging out of it, Armenians and Azerbaijanis fought a war from 1988 to 1994, driven in part by the fact that the boundaries of the new Armenian and Azerbaijani states did not correspond with the ethnic boundaries. At the end of the war, in which atrocities were committed, ethnic Armenians controlled an enclave within Azerbaijan. As we all know, it's known as Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh seceded from Azerbaijan, though that was not widely recognized, and the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh have defended it ever since, not permitting it to be integrated into Azerbaijan out of concern about what the government of Azerbaijan might do to them and their historical presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. We will hear testimony today on the reasonableness of this concern, and again, we will get insights on what do we do to try to mitigate any current or future bloodshed. Suffice to say is that the government of Azerbaijan does not accept the state of affairs, and I personally have been twice in Baku and have raised it personally with President Aliyev. And, you know, as we all know, ceasefires have been violated, especially most aggressively in 2020. And working together with the government of Turkey, they've attained military dominance over Nagorno-Karabakh. It has also repeatedly broken commitments, that is to say the government of Azerbaijan, to permit access to Nagorno-Karabakh, and for the past 7 years has permitted only basic medical necessities and humanitarian food supplies, with an evident intention to create a humanitarian crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh. The United States has engaged in attempts to find a peaceful solution in this so-called frozen conflict, along with the Russians and the French. But the process appears to be breaking down, and pressure is vastly ramping up on the Armenians to give way to Azerbaijan and its partner, Turkey. How far the United States, Russia, and France will go to pressure Armenians to give way in Nagorno-Karabakh is not clear, but the opaqueness of these discussions is itself a sign of concern. At this point, we don't want, in Nagorno-Karabakh today, we have a vulnerable small population surrounded by vastly larger and more powerful military forces of Azerbaijan backed by Turkey. Since 2020, Azerbaijan has been tightening a noose on Nagorno-Karabakh. Its forces have occupied much of the former territory and even territory of Armenia proper. The government of Azerbaijan has broken agreements, and it has made it much more difficult for people to get food and other goods in and out of Nagorno-Karabakh. So, as our government is leading discussions with Azerbaijan and Armenian leaders, we in the Congress have a responsibility to ask, where is all of this headed? What is the Azeri quality of mind? Above all, as these discussions continue, what would constitute adequate safeguards for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh? What is the administration doing to make sure that the capital is not starved into submission or ethnically cleansed? Our country simply cannot accept a risk of genocide or of ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. That's why when we mean by safeguards for the people there, I hope the administration will recognize that. And again, as Ambassador Brownback has said so well in his written testimony, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh do have a right to survival in their ancestral homeland, quote, the right not to be driven out, starved, or blockaded by the government of Azerbaijan. And as our ambassador also says, the The United States has a responsibility to hold the government of Azerbaijan accountable for its actions. We have a capacity to stop this religious cleansing, and we must use it. I'd like to now yield to my good friend and colleague, Co-Chair McGovern.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to join Co-Chair Smith in welcoming everybody here today for today's Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission hearing on civilian protection in Nagorno-Karabakh. Mr. Phillips and Mr. Evans and Ambassador Brownback, we're honored to have you here. I want to apologize to you in advance because some unexpected business is on the floor, so some of us will be running back and forth, and other members will probably join you as well. But we are here today because there is a growing fear among Armenians who live in Nagorno-Karabakh that they are in danger. Given the history of the Armenian people, no one should be surprised there is fear. It was only 2 years ago that President Biden officially recognized the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1917, during which 1.5 million Armenians were deported, massacred, or marched to their deaths in a campaign of extermination by the Ottoman authorities. Those atrocities were committed more than 100 years ago, but for many Armenians it feels like yesterday. That is the context in which recent actions taken by the government of Azerbaijan are being experienced and interpreted. Azerbaijan is not Turkey, but it is a close ally of Turkey, the successor to the Ottoman Empire. People fear the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the longest running in post-Soviet Eurasia, could fuel a repeat of the past. It is important to remember how we got here. In 1988, ethnic Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh demanded the transfer of what was then the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast from Soviet Azerbaijan to Armenia. As the Soviet Union collapsed, tensions grew into outright war. When fighting ceased in 1994, Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent districts were wholly or partially controlled by Armenian forces. More than 1 million people had been forced from their homes. Azerbaijanis fled Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and the adjacent territories, while Armenians left homes in Azerbaijan. From 1994 until 2020, intermittent deadly incidents demonstrated the ever-present risk that war would reignite. In April of 2016, 4 days of intense fighting at the line of separation killed hundreds on both sides. Full-fledged war resumed on September 27, 2020. 6 weeks of bloody armed conflict finally ended on November 10th with a Russian-brokered ceasefire. Under the agreement, Azerbaijan fully controls the 7 districts adjacent to Nagorno-Karabakh that Armenian forces had held since the previous war. It also holds a substantial part of Nagorno-Karabakh itself. The rest is patrolled by a Russian peacekeeping force, but still governed by self-proclaimed local authorities. During the 2020 war, some 90,000 residents of Nagorno-Karabakh were forcibly displaced. Today, more than 40,000 are still displaced. Before the 2020 war, the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh was about 147,000. Today, it is estimated to be down to lower than 120,000. Forced displacement can be a tactic used to achieve ethnic cleansing. That's not always the case, but it is sometimes the case. And since the end of the war, a lot has happened. In territories Azerbaijan reclaimed, the government has gradually begun to resettle Azeris who were displaced in the 1990s. It has also taken control of more territory, some in keeping with the ceasefire agreement, some illegally occupied. In September 2022, Azerbaijani forces launched cross-border attacks in which 200 Armenians were killed or went missing, and 80 Azerbaijanis were killed. And then in December 2022, Azerbaijan began asserting control over the Latkin corridor that connects Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. First, a group of activists blocked civilian and commercial traffic on the corridor, leaving thousands of Armenians without access to essential goods, including food and medicines. The Azeri government denied that the activists had its backing, but the International Court of Justice didn't buy that when this February it ordered Azerbaijan to take all measures at its disposal to ensure unimpeded movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo along the Latkin corridor in both directions. Then in April, Azerbaijan established an official border checkpoint that means local Armenian residents cannot transit to and from Nagorno-Karabakh. The Azerbaijani community wants to talk about Azeri sovereignty, since Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. But the bottom line is that the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh understandably feels vulnerable and at risk. So, what do we do about this? What is the pro-human rights response here? It is to ensure civilian protection, which means taking any and all actions we can to prevent further escalation of tensions that could lead to more war and new atrocities. I'm happy to say that many of us in Congress have already been paying attention. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of House Resolution 108, a bipartisan resolution introduced by Congressman Frank Pallone and Gus Bilirakis in February, which condemns the blockade and makes recommendations I am sure will be echoed today. They include full enforcement of Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, and I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to co-sponsor this resolution. I also think it's important to recognize that the United States government has long supported and facilitated peace talks to resolve the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, including through the Minsk Group created in 1992. Multilateral efforts continue, and the Biden administration just hosted both foreign ministers for several days of negotiations last month. Although I might wish for greater transparency about the proposals under discussion, a difficult thing to do during sensitive negotiations, I strongly support these peace efforts because everyone knows a political agreement is the only feasible path forward for this entrenched dispute and the only alternative to more war. I look forward to your recommendations as to how to increase the chances of success. Again, I thank Chairman Smith for his leadership on this, and I again thank all the witnesses for being here.
I thank the co-chair, you'll wait till later. I can wait. Okay. I'd like to now introduce our very distinguished panel, beginning first with Ambassador Sam Brownback. What a career Sam Brownback has had. First as a U.S. House of Representatives member, then a U.S. Senator from Kansas, Governor of Kansas, and then Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. I served when he was the chairman of the Helsinki Commission, and he did an extraordinary job there as well. He has always been a principled and thoughtful voice for human rights and humanitarian concerns, and we are very honored to have him here today. He just returned from a fact-finding mission to Armenia. Our second witness is Michael Rubin, who will be coming to us remotely in a few moments. Is senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He has written several books and many academic articles on Middle Eastern affairs and edited the Middle East Quarterly. He is perhaps best known in Washington, D.C. as the author of over 2,000 opinion essays in print media, and they are very incisive and authoritative pieces. We're grateful to have him here and to be willing to give us his insights. Our third witness is David Phillips, who's an academic visitor at St. Anthony College, Southeast European Studies at Oxford University. He previously served as director of the program on peace building and rights at Columbia University's Institute for Study of Human Rights. Mr. Phillips has served in the U.S. Department of State during the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. He has authored many books, including Unsilencing the Past, Track 2, Diplomacy, and Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation. Our fourth witness will be John Evans, who served as an American diplomat for over 30 years, including as United States ambassador to Armenia from 2004 to 2006. He's an expert on Armenian affairs as well as the Caucasus regionally. Ambassador Brownback, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Congressman Bilirakis, good to see you here as well, and chairing the Religious Freedom Caucus, I believe, as well. So delighted that you're here. Thank you for the coverage that you've already done of the topics, so there's really no need to cover any of those topics. I will ask that my testimony be in the record as if presented.
Without objection, so ordered, and all of your testimonies and any other information you want to attach to the record. Thank
you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think just really get right to the heart of it. You've got 120,000 Christians that are being strangled, blockaded by Azerbaijan. It's against the peace agreement. It's against what the International Court of Justice has found. And yet it's taking place. It's being backed by Erdogan, who is the probably the leading Islamist person in the world that's pushing militant Islam of any government leader in the world is President Erdogan. He just got reelected on top of that. And he's got this pan-Turkic idea of a corridor, and the one kind of sliver of land that stands between him and this pan-Turkic corridor is Armenia. And so there were 3 incursions into Armenia proper the week we were there on the fact-finding trip. This isn't just Nagorno-Karabakh, this is into Armenia proper. And we were at Jarmuk which is a kind of a resort town in one part of Armenia, and you could see the Azeri forces on the other hill from where we were, and the ability for them to just lob artillery into that town at any time is right there. It really reminded me of Sarajevo in the situation there where you had the troops that just surrounded the hills and could just fire in and killed huge numbers of people. On top of this, people say, well, it's not about religion, and I agree it's not a religious conflict, but religion is there, and it's a key piece of it. It'd be hard to believe that this would happen to Nagorno-Karabakh if it was a Muslim population. It's a Christian population. And that's where, to me, I come in standing up for religious freedom and for religious minorities. I think it's important for us to stand up here. Another key thought on this, Mr. Chairman and Congressman Bilirakis, we have seen historic Christian populations being driven completely out of the Middle East, virtually. There's population left in Egypt, but it's been driven out of virtually everywhere else. This is another historic Christian population that's going to get driven out if we don't take some policy moves. And thankfully, we have some that are available to us. But how many more of these do we have to see? And you can see that that's the play that's taking place in Nagorno-Karabakh, that Azerbaijan's going to squeeze the place, just force the people to leave. You can leave, but you can't return. They'll go to Europe. They'll go to another part of Armenia. They'll come to the United States or Canada. They'll make a nice living. There are a number of diaspora of Armenia around the world now that have done very well, some of them in this room. It's wonderful people. But do we want to see yet another ancient Christian population be driven out of its homeland? Yet another one. And a lot of this is with U.S. weaponry that the Azeris have, or Israeli weaponry that the Azeris have. And I just say, no, we should not have that taking place on our watch and at this time. And it doesn't need to happen. So I've got a few policy recommendations that I've put in here that I think would be important to do. One would be really for Congress to step up and take some of the lead on this. And I think you ought to put together a bipartisan Nagorno-Karabakh Human Rights Act. Just put together a Human Rights Act, not a resolution, an act, a bill, a law, that says here are the minimum standards for what we expect the security to be and the human rights to be able to be for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. And just state them out there clearly and specifically. 907 already exists that if U.S. weaponry is being used in an offensive fashion against Armenia, this is a violation of that, and that's taking place now. So I think unless Azerbaijan lifts that blockade, that those Section 907 sanctions should be put in place by the president, by the administration. They ought to take place now if they will not lift this blockade. Congress can come in with this Nagorno-Karabakh Human Rights Act, setting basic security guarantees. I think a congressional delegation traveling there would be to Nagorno-Karabakh. We tried to get into Nagorno-Karabakh. We couldn't get in. They wouldn't let us in to the place. But I would think they would let a congressional delegation. I'd hope they would. And if they wouldn't, that would also tell you something that's taking place. I think the American faith community that has really stood up. I chair an International Religious Freedom Summit, and we've got people of all faiths coming together to stand up for each other's religious freedom. And our mantra is pretty simple: religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Well, that includes the people in Nagorno-Karabakh, that they should have that religious freedom. They should have that basic human rights standard and dignity to be able to practice their faith, even if it's different from the majority in that region. And that's why I'm here, and part of the reason that I'm standing up for them. And I would hope a broader faith community would stand up to support the people of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh as a religious minority in this region. And maybe it's Christians and others for Armenia and for Nagorno-Karabakh that's stepping up in that region. Mr. Chairman, as I left that Yerevan, and you've been there, and you see Mount Ararat just staring over the city, which is such a majestic view from the city and from the airport, it reminds you of the historical significance of Armenia, first Christian nation on earth, before any other nation was, still is. It's been persecuted by multiple empires over thousands of years, the Persians, the Ottoman, Russians, others, and yet they're still there. They are still there. They're still fighting. And they just inspire you with their tenacity, with their courage, their pluck. Armenia, to me, and I put it in my testimony, is really kind of the Israel of Christendom, where it stood there so long, and we should stand with them, and we should not allow them to be driven out of this ancient homeland with the use particularly of U.S. weaponry doing this. And we should stand up policy-wise here, and we should stand up compassionately. We should have, I would hope, Christian activists and others from across this country and world standing up and sending aid and support to the Armenian people like they did during the genocide that took place in 1915. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for holding this hearing. I think it's a critical one, and hopefully this will spur some action taking place.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ambassador. You know, your Human Rights Act idea is a great one. I had written a bill that never became law called the Azerbaijan Human Rights Act, and the backlash, uninformed out of Baku, was earth-shattering as to what my motives were. There was even one Radio Free Europe reporter who, because she investigated, she was a stringer, she was a local person, but did tremendous reporting, she got a over 7-year prison sentence. So we had a hearing on her too, and we had people from Radio Free Europe, the head of it, come and testify. And we kept telling Aliyev, release these prisoners. And you're right about the issue of using American weaponry. Remember, Turkey used American weaponry in Cyprus. And so there's been a very poor track record. Of course, Turkey is not Azerbaijan, but there's a coalition, of course, there. So your idea of the Human Rights Act is a good one. We will follow up on it. I thank you for that idea. Mr. Rubin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Chairman Smith.
Mr. Rubin, if you could suspend for 1 second. Mr. Evans, Ambassador Evans.
Mr. Rubin's in Portugal. He said to find remotely, but he's there.
Okay.
Ready?
Yes, live from Portugal.
Okay. Chairman Smith, Chairman McGovern, honorable members, thank you for allowing me to testify remotely as I was not able to get back on time. It's excellent to see such bipartisan support on this problem. Time is short, so if my detailed testimony is in the record, let me focus on the bottom line. President Aliyev has changed and grown more erratic over the last decade. I'd say his trajectory is almost analogous to what we saw with Saddam Hussein. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is absolutely right to turn attention to Nagorno-Karabakh. And just while we've had 30 years of diplomacy with regard to this problem, just the energy which the current administration has placed on this issue is very much commendable. Now, that said, strategy matters, and so does timing. We need to talk about sequencing. It's one thing to try to get a broad agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but that agreement is going to be meaningless if disputes with regard to the borders are pushed down, are kicked down the road. Because if that happens, then Azerbaijan is going to have an excuse in order not to implement an agreement. It also opens the floor, opens the possibility to have some sort of fake 9-dash line type map. And we've already heard President Aliyev saying, well, Yerevan is part of historical Azerbaijan. We need to nip this in the bud. We can't simply assume that this is a rhetorical excess, the way, unfortunately, we did with Saddam Hussein in 1990 before his push into Kuwait. I would also argue that we need to ensure that the laws which are on the books are actually implemented. The waiver of Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act does not enable diplomacy. Moral equivalence does not work. Impunity invites aggression. It's also an affront to Congress. If the State Department finds that Section 907 and what the waiver requires is inconvenient, then it should go to Congress to pass a new amendment, to pass a new law. It can't simply willy-nilly override U.S. law. I would argue that the logic that we can't enforce the U.S. law because it would impede diplomacy is also inaccurate. Azerbaijan is going to do what's in Azerbaijan's interest vis-a-vis Iran. They're not doing it simply because we're allowing Azerbaijan to have some weaponry, which, as Ambassador Brownback has said, has been utilized against Armenia, not only the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh, but against Armenia proper. We also have on the books the Humanitarian Corridors Act, which dates back to the first Nagorno-Karabakh war and to the Bosnia conflict. The fact is, and we've seen this in the last day, with Azerbaijan using BTRs, armored personnel carriers, to block the Lachin corridor, they are in violation of this. And as far as I'm aware, there's absolutely no waiver with regard to the Humanitarian Corridors Act, and therefore U.S. assistance should stop immediately. There's also the Magnitsky Act, which is another policy arrow in our quiver. Azerbaijan is one of the most corrupt countries on earth. That corruption is clear because despite its tremendous hydrocarbons, its actual per capita income is less than that of Georgia and Armenia, which do not have that energy resource, which basically means that ordinary Azerbaijanis live far more poorly than ordinary Armenians and Georgians do, simply given how so many billions of dollars have flown into the Aliyev accounts, have gone into the Azerbaijani laundromat and caviar diplomacy, and otherwise been siphoned away. Cultural heritage also matters, and I'm sure David Phillips, my good friend, is going to talk about this, but before we impose a peace, we should at the very least have a 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week video monitoring. We shouldn't just verify. We shouldn't just trust. We need to verify as well in real time. We should focus on incitement. There's going to be no lasting peace if Azerbaijan still incites from school-age kids and in the military against Armenians. The State Department should issue, and Congress should require through an act, an annual report on the state of Azerbaijani incitement. Beyond that, there are any number of other ideas which are out there. I would just say in conclusion, this situation is real, it's grave and growing. President Aliyev has become more erratic, but fortunately, we still have many policy arrows in our quiver which we could utilize. Timing matters. The State Department should be applauded for its diplomacy, but not all diplomacy is the same. It needs to be done right. It needs to be done with a greater strategic overview, and we need to understand the forest through the trees and not simply count ourselves as victorious or wise in our diplomacy if tree counting supplants the forest, which, as the ambassador has said, is the preservation of one of the oldest Christian communities in the oldest Christian country. We should not simply allow that for diplomatic convenience to go by the wayside. And with that, I want to thank the panel for my time.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Rubin, for your many excellent recommendations, which we will follow up on, and your insights. I'd like to now recognize David Phillips.
Thank you, Congressman Smith, and thanks to Co-Chair McGovern and Congressman Bilirakis for your leadership here and around the world. I'm very pleased to be testifying alongside Ambassador Brownback, Michael Rubin for his unflagging and principled support, and John Evans, who I met many years ago in Yerevan and with whom I've maintained contact. The Commission and human rights advocates everywhere are grateful to President Biden for annually recognizing the Armenian genocide in his Remembrance Day statement. Most of you are familiar with the Turkish-Armenia Reconciliation Commission, which I chaired from 2004 to 2001 to 2004. The TARC reaffirmed the applicability of the term genocide to characterize the World War I era treatment of Armenians. What we see today is a second Armenian genocide, which is underway. And the United States is simply not doing what it can do to stop this pattern, despite ample evidence of credible human rights organizations. I urge this commission to do more, including visiting ARTSOC, to express solidarity there, and to make clear that American values on human rights and genocide prevention not be traded for hydrocarbons or other concessions to authoritarian leaders. As we've learned painfully in many places, deals with corrupt authoritarians end up harming the U.S., no matter the perceived short-term transactional benefits. I also want to commend the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom for exposing the horrible destruction of Armenian Christian churches and monuments reminiscent of the Taliban's conduct. The U.S. has several tools it can use here. Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act is frequently cited. It requires cutting off assistance to Azerbaijan for blockades and aggressive military action. Waivers of Section 907 only harm U.S. credibility. The disproportionate arms transfers to Baku at the end of the Trump administration served to embolden Azerbaijan and Turkey's war in 2020. Another U.S. law on the books since the mid-1990s is the Humanitarian Aid Corridors Act. It provides that no assistance shall be furnished under this chapter of the Arms Control Act to any country when the government of such country prohibits or otherwise restricts, directly or indirectly, the transport or delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance. It was initiated by Van Krikorian of the Armenian Assembly, and I know Co-Chairman Smith played a very active role and was proud in securing its passage. It is obviously applicable in more areas where human rights violations take place and humanitarian efforts are frustrated. In addition, the Global Magnitsky Act, sanctions, as well as other tools also exist for gruesome and state-sponsored terrorist activities, which I will refer to next. Azerbaijani forces attacked Artsakh on September 27, 2020. They used armed drones, heavy artillery, rockets, and special forces. They were backed by Turkish military and mercenaries, including up to 2,000 Islamist jihadis from Syria and Libya, who were promised a bounty for killing Armenians. Trophy videos of these jihadists show them boasting over Armenian bodies they had mutilated. Within days of the attack on Artsakh, Columbia University launched a research and documentation project on human rights and foreign terrorist activities in Artsakh. It is cited in pending House and Senate legislation. The project, in cooperation with the Artsakh Human Rights Ombudsman, documents Azerbaijan's systematic effort to drive Armenians from their homeland through killings, ethnic cleansing, and deportations. Specific perpetrators of gruesome atrocities intended to advance Azerbaijan's genocidal intent are identified and documented. The destruction of religious and cultural sites is also documented. Here I would refer you to the Cornell University site, which has used advanced satellite imagery to expose this conduct. The overall goal of Azerbaijan was and remains the cultural erasure of Armenians. In violation of the trilateral ceasefire statement of November 9, 2020, Azerbaijan blocked the Lachin corridor on December 12th. Mr. Rubin referred to a recent photo on the bridge leading to Artsakh, where an APC has been parked and is blocking the passage of civilians. many of whom are seeking medical services. Blocking the corridor has left 120,000 Armenians without life-saving medication and health care. Azerbaijan established checkpoints on the border with Armenia. It cut gas, electricity, water, mobile communications, and it is engaged in well-documented daily attacks. The ultimate aim, and let's be clear, is emptying Artsakh of its native Armenian population by subjecting them to physical and psychological attacks, making their lives unlivable. Last weekend, President Erdogan visited Baku and urged further actions to send Armenians the message that they are unwanted. Erdogan's new government includes a foreign minister who has committed crimes against Armenians. These crimes did not occur in the fog of war. It is a stated policy of Azerbaijan. In 2004, Azerbaijani Defense Minister Safar Abiyev stated, "Within the next 25 years, there will be no state of Armenia in the South Caucasus." In 2005, the mayor of Baku addressed a German delegation. "Our goal is the complete elimination of Armenians. You Nazis already eliminated the Jews in the 1930s and 1940s, right? You should be able to understand us." Ilham Aliyev stated on December 24, 2022, "Work should focus on a single concept and policy, our return. Now the Great Return Program for Karabakh is being implemented. Inshallah, there will come a time when we develop a second Great Return Program to Greater Azerbaijan. We will drive them away like dogs." It is clear from Aliyev's actions and his hate speech that a second Armenian genocide is underway. The Erdogan regime is a full partner. It has equipped Azerbaijan with the tools to implement its Armenophobia. Erdogan's wife is recorded urging Aliyev not to release 2020 prisoners of war, to maintain leverage despite the stated agreement. We know that Aliyev has a record of not keeping his commitments. POWs have not been accounted for, which is a violation of international humanitarian law. A report and study should be issued. We have already conducted research that we can make available. This commission and the administration can do much more. With a national security policy prioritizing democracy, why are the democracies of Armenia and Artsakh being asked to capitulate to the terrorism of Aliyev and Erdogan? In December 2021, the International Court of Justice ordered Azerbaijan to take all necessary measures to prevent and punish acts of vandalism and desecration affecting Armenian cultural heritage. Azerbaijan simply ignored the court's order. In the summer of 2022, the 18th century Armenian Church of St. Sargis was completely razed. Subsequently, ICJ ordered Azerbaijan to respect the November terms and allow free transport of the Lachin corridor. We hope that the documentation project on atrocities in Artsakh will preserve evidence to deter future crimes and hold perpetrators accountable. Those perpetrators include not only Azerbaijan, but also Erdogan and his cohorts in Turkey. Erdogan stated, "Turkey stands with and will continue to stand with friendly and brotherly Azerbaijan with all our means and all our heart." Aliyev and Erdogan are blood brothers who belong in the dock together. My testimony, which is submitted for the record, details more extensively Turkey's involvement in these actions, including Turkey's use of F-16s and its acquisition of weapons from Russia, which should be actionable under CATSA. The U.S. should look at CATSA, explore ways it's applicable to actions of Turkey and Azerbaijan, and make sure that CATSA is the law of the land and it is fully enforced. I'll leave it there, and look forward to your questions so we can speak further.
Thank you so
Thanks.
very much, Mr. Phillips. Just a point, you talked about the second Armenian genocide. I've chaired 3 hearings on the Armenian genocide. And before the first one, I went and read Ambassador Morgenthau's book, which was written contemporaneously with the horrific genocide that was committed. And to think that, as you have pointed out, this is, we're in the midst of the second Armenian genocide is just, it's frightening. And we need to do more as a country. I think other interested democracies need to do more. So I thank you for your testimony. I'd like to now call on Ambassador Evans and yield such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I find myself in the fourth position here, wanting to associate myself with virtually everything that's been said. All these observations have been remarkably on the mark, and so I would ask that my testimony simply be put into the record, but I will draw a couple of points from it for today. I was in Yerevan in 2004 to 2006. I never dealt directly with the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. That was being handled by the Minsk group, of course. But nonetheless, I did learn a lot about what was going on. And I learned a fair amount about Armenian history, which, by the way, is quite fascinating once you get into it. I'd just like to make 3 points about the Armenians in Karabakh, or as they call it, Artsakh. One of the earliest histories recounts that after losing an important battle to the Persians, the Armenians, quote, fled into the forests of Artsakh. That's one of the earliest references to Artsakh and to Armenians being there. Second point, a well-known, well-respected German visitor to the Caucasus in the 1840s reported that the Armenians are, quote, most numerous in the province of Karabakh after Armenian proper, end quote. And the third point, we may think poorly of the Bolsheviks, and particularly of Joseph Stalin, and of many of their policies. But it was not for no reason that the Commissariat for Nationalities made Nagorno-Karabakh an autonomous region within Soviet Azerbaijan. Stalin, of course, was from the Caucasus, and there were many of his colleagues who knew the area well, and they realized that this was a different kind of place and that it needed to have an autonomy, which is, of course, what it received in 1924. Now, there are lots of arguments about whether that was the right thing to do, but my point is simply that it was clear something had to be done because this place was special. So I would maintain that the Armenians are indigenous to Karabakh. Now that claim can be disputed by academic people who draw very careful distinctions, but as was said here earlier, they do have a history in Karabakh. So whether they're completely indigenous or that they just have an important history there, I don't think it makes much difference. And it's not that we should treat indigenous people well and others badly. These people deserve to be treated with respect, whoever they are and whenever they got to Karabakh. Last week, our Supreme Court, I think, did something very, very noteworthy when it sided with the several indigenous tribes out west on the question of adoption of orphans. Now, orphans of indigenous families or background. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Armenians are in any way equivalent to the indigenous people in our out west, but the point is the court decided to strengthen the elements of sovereignty that the people out west, the indigenous people, have. And there should be respect for these groups. And I wish Azerbaijan had that same intent or inclination. I'm going to skip over a lot of this here. One of the points, though, that is sometimes disputed is whether there really is a danger of genocide. I would say absolutely there is. It's been stated here today that the second genocide has already begun. That may be questionable, but I think there is a real danger of it, and it's not only in view of the 1915 precedent, but it's also, as David has said, it's in view of the actions, recorded actions and speech of Azerbaijani officials and politicians, and that also includes politicians in Turkey. So this is real. Now, I'm leaving out some more about the failure of the OSCE Minsk group. It still theoretically exists, but I think it has in some ways outlived its usefulness. It was one of the few fora in which the United States, Russia, and France continued to cooperate despite the increasing numbers of friction, elements of friction between East and West. But I think at this point that process cannot be counted on, and I would join the chorus in praising the State Department for getting back into it. I do believe the State Department calculated wrongly in the last administration, devalued the Minsk group process, and that was one of the things that led to its collapse. Now, I'll come right to the end here. It seems to me that it's true that there needs to be ultimately a peace settlement, and that's for the people of Karabakh and the Azerbaijanis to work out themselves how they're going to manage to be neighbors in the future. That's not our task today. I think our task today is simply to consider how to preserve the lives of the Armenians in Karabakh in the face of a potentially genocidal threat. I certainly agree with the idea that the waiver of Section 907 ought to be rescinded. I think it should have been done at the same time as President Biden recognized the Armenian genocide. I don't know what's going on in diplomatic conversations, but I think it would be well to urge our diplomats to put the brakes on Turkish and Israeli arms sales to Baku. All the other members of the Minsk group, and Turkey is technically a member of that group, but all the others had basically agreed to preserve the military balance in the Caucasus. Now, Russia, of course, played the biggest role as a supplier to both sides. But when Israeli and Turkish high-tech drones and other equipment got in there, not to mention the F-16s, this really upset the situation and has brought us to where we are. But as the Armenian surgeon who treated Senator Dole advised him, you can't think about the way you were and what you had. You have to think about where you are now and go forward from here. And I think that's what we have to do. I think it would be very good to have some more high-level, and I mean top-level, discussions with Azerbaijan and make it crystal clear that the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians in Karabakh is absolutely unacceptable to the United States. Mr. Chairman, I actually do have some ideas about what ought to be done for an overall settlement. This is not the place for me to share them. I have to commit them to paper, but I'm planning to do that in the next few weeks. I think ultimately we do need a goal so that both sides can see that diplomacy can get to a place where they both have their dignity intact and people can, on both sides, can accept. It's not going to be a perfect settlement from some people's point of view. As President Biden said in another context, that's politics. Compromise is of the essence. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for calling me to share my thoughts.
Ambassador Evans, thank you. Yes,
I'd just like to add a thought about the sale.
put it on.
Just want to add a thought about CATSA. U.S. drones, U.S. components in Turkish drones are being transferred to countries that use them in ways which we don't approve of. We should document that. We should use CATSA, which has never really been fully enforced, as a way of enforcing U.S. interests, and make sure that there's documentation and that U.S. munitions going to Turkey don't end up in the wrong hands.
Thank you. So many tremendous ideas and insights, and of course, warnings about how this is getting worse. Just a couple of thoughts. And even like the F-16s and the enhancements, I think everybody on this panel here are in agreement that it should not go to Erdogan. But there are other people who see differently, and certainly the administration might push that forward. So we got to continually monitor that. But let me just, especially with his recent win, Erdogan seems to be even more aggressive and more animated in his goals. And I'm wondering if that is, tipping things even further in the negative. Ambassador Brownback, having just returned, what is the level of concern among the people that you met with? Do they feel that America is doing enough or not enough? Is there more that we could be doing? I mean, I'm a great believer of the Magnitsky Act. I was the House sponsor of that bill. We added it to the NDAA, and it is a very good law for picking out individual human rights violators and the like. And it seems to me if we had a list of people that we felt needed to be sanctioned, perhaps you witnesses have some ideas of who should be on that list. As you know, Ambassador Brownback, you were one of the first ones that got into Darfur during that horrific tragedy. I went as well, but you broke ground. You were one of the first, I think, the first senator or House member to be there. And it wasn't until that leader began to realize that he was indicted by the ICC and he had real penalties hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles that any kind of progress began to be made. So individual sanctioning, I think it was said by one of you, enforcing the law impedes diplomacy. Well, that shouldn't be the case. Let's enforce our laws robustly, particularly on the sanctions regime, to make sure that the laws, the diplomacy does work. So like all of you, I'm very concerned. We are all very concerned here on this panel. And so the idea of the Human Rights Act, we'll get working on that right away, because I was kind of shocked how poorly Baku and especially Aliyev responded when they did the Azerbaijani Human Rights Act. I mean, that's all they talked about. Their Congress censored me. And it was like, okay, just release your prisoners and stop abusing them and torturing them, including the abuse that was heaped upon a journalist for Radio Free Europe. So what else do you think we need to be doing right now? I mean, is the administration doing enough? Are the people saying we've got their backs, they being the people that you met with, Ambassador Brownback? And this, just for the record, this is part one of 2 hearings that we're going to hold. The other, we're going to invite the administration. I probably will do that through my subcommittee. It's called Subcommittee on Human Rights, Democracy, Subcommittee on Human Rights and Global Health and international organizations. Because, the international organizations, it seems to me, particularly at the UN, they need to do more. We all need to step up. I mean, I remember when the Balkans War was, before they even went into Croatia. I was raising issues. I went over there constantly. I met with Milosevic in Belgrade, and everybody said, "Oh, there's nothing you can do." And next thing you know, we had hundreds of thousands of people displaced and killed, and rapes was used as a weapon, particularly against the Bosnians. So I raised this. Horrible things have already happened, But I think if I'm hearing all of you correctly, we're on the precipice of many more horrible things unless there's a tourniquet put on this immediately. Ambassador.
Yeah, Congressman, I completely agree with that. But this is one, and you worked in the former Yugoslavia. You know what was setting up, and you saw it, and you yelled about it, and we didn't do anything. And later we did. I mean, later we recognized Kosovo, we armed Kosovo, and after hundreds of thousands of people were dislocated or killed and raped and everything else, here you got one where a little bit of effort by the United States right now, targeted. I mean, I really think the 907, the Magnitsky targeted. I mean, but you actually pop them on something. You stop these weapon flows from coming from us and the Israelis. We need to push on the Israelis not to have the weapons flows going to Azerbaijan. You could actually stop this thing from further developing. I really think both Erdogan and Aliyev are just continuing to push this, thinking we're distracted. Russia's the big deal here. We're not going to do anything because we like Azerbaijan helping us with Iran, so that gives them a free pass card. They can just go ahead and do these things. And I think they're just going to keep doing it until we really actually do something here. And we actually, we've listed several details of things that could happen. And I think if you did that, you ask about the people. The people in our delegation that met and talked with some individuals there, the individuals, when they found out we're from the United States, and this is primarily a Christian, Jewish delegation, it was primarily Christian groups, Jewish groups that were there, they were ecstatic we were there. They just happy somebody else cared. They have been so tied in with Russia for so long and so dependent upon Russia to help them. And now the Russians have traded them off, gave them away. They're not guarding the Lachen corridor. They're not keeping it open like they're supposed to, that they could. And so they just feel like they've been traded off by the Russians. But they know the Americans could help them, but they're not there yet. One guy gave us a great example of saying it's like the Armenians clinging to this little life raft. They've been left adrift in the middle of the ocean. They're clinging to this little life raft. And if they swim 100 meters over here, there's a big ocean liner they can get to. But they got to let go of the little Russian life raft to swim over here and to get in with the U.S. and a part of a Western support system. We got to help them. We got to encourage them. We got to tell them we will be there. We are there for you. We'll help you with weapons system to defend yourself, because we did that eventually in the former Yugoslavia. We need to do it now before it gets to be a really wild situation and you get hundreds of thousands of people dislocated. The objective here, I think, is just really clear on Nagorno-Karabakh. It's just to strangle this place and make it unlivable till people just kind of leave and go to Europe, go to the United States, go to Canada, and then it gets populated by Azerbaijan. And it's being artfully done, I think, by the Azeris, because it's just kind of a slow squeeze. So they're letting some humanitarian aid in. They let the gas flow once in a while, and then they shut it off other times. But if you're a young person in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, you're probably going, do I really need to put up with this? I'm just going to go to Europe, or I've got family members somewhere else. I'll just go. And that's the answer we've let people do for 30 years. And you've seen then the vacancy of these historic Christian populations because we've done it. And we'll take them, but that's not what we should force them to do, particularly with these policy levers we have, but we've got to use them now. I think that's the real key of this thing, is that they've got to feel some clear pushback and some line draws. Aliyev does and Erdogan does, or I think they keep pushing.
Ambassador Brownback has opened the floor to a nautical metaphor. And this morning when I woke up, it occurred to me that what's happening to Artsakh, and I mean this with no disrespect to the people who are on the submersible, but the messages we're getting out of Artsakh are as alarming as the situation of those poor people on that submersible. So I'm in effect seconding the point of how very serious this present moment is.
In June of 1992, Milosevic telegraphed his war plans for Croatia and Bosnia. So we knew well in advance what was coming. Erdogan himself has talked about revisiting the Treaty of Lausanne and seizing territories in the Eastern Mediterranean in order to capture the gas fields that are there. We should take him at his word. We have advance warning. If he does that, then NATO is called into question. Our ally Greece and Cyprus are at risk, so we should read the writing on the wall and take preventive measures.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Rubin, anything you wanted to add? Do you think some of the past models are inadequate, like Kurdistan, in terms of what the international community has followed?
Well, what I would argue is that the United States has much more flexibility than perhaps our diplomats realize. So, for example, there is an assumption which we often hear repeated by U.S. diplomats, by Azeri diplomats, and by those who want to carry water for Azerbaijan, which is Nagorno-Karabakh is under the sovereignty of Azerbaijan. If we actually look at the diplomatic record, there is more flexibility there. The idea was that the borders would be addressed peacefully, and therefore final sovereignty couldn't be determined until that happened. That's why we have more flexibility in what models we might propose to Azerbaijan. So, for example, on one end of the spectrum is the Kosovo model, which has extreme parallels to what we see with regard to Nagorno-Karabakh today. There's also the UN Trust Territory model. If we look at the Federated States of Micronesia, if we look at Palau, if we look at various countries in Africa, this is a model which the United Nations has used. And actually, it was a model that almost came into play with regard to Armenia, dating back to the League of Nations, when unfortunately the US Senate failed to ratify a specific proposal to make the US the trustee for Armenia. The entire history of the Cold War and the area of the South Caucasus would have gone differently had it not been for a few votes back in 1920 or so. Iraqi Kurdistan is also a model that could come into play, where basically Iraqi Kurds have basic autonomies, basic protections written into the Iraqi constitution. All I can say right now is, as was said by, I believe, Ambassador Evans, it's unconscionable to take a democracy like Artsakh and subordinate it to a country that, according to Freedom House, is not only not free, but is actually less democratic than Burma and Russia. And so what we need to do is take a step back and recognize the symbolism of what we are doing. We shouldn't try to rush diplomacy, rush a solution to the US political calendar, but rather we should look at what the best possible outcome would be for US national security, as well as for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. The last point I would make very briefly is we heard the nautical metaphor. What comes to mind as a historian is what we saw in 1973 in Egypt. While some people are willing to say, you know, Armenia has traditionally had a relationship with Russia, therefore we need to embrace Azerbaijan. Back in 1973, rather than dismissing Anwar Sadat as a Soviet proxy, more agile diplomacy, which started during the Nixon and Ford administration and continued in the Carter administration, decided that Egypt could be flipped. And that's what enabled the Camp David Accords and the first major peace treaty allowing for Arab-Israeli peace. We need to take some lessons from the past, lessons from other parts of the world, rather than try to rush through diplomacy in the final years of the Biden administration's first term or the Biden administration period.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Without objection, Gus Bilirakis will assume the chair, member of the executive committee. I have to, like my good friend McGovern, Jim McGovern, have to go and give a speech, and I apologize for that. But we will follow up on this Human Rights Act, which you have recommended, Ambassador Brownback. And without objection, I'm happy to invite Frank Pallone, my friend and colleague from my state of New Jersey, to join the panel and ask such questions as he would like and make such statements. Thank you, Frank. Thank you. Thank
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be in the chair and actually fill in for the great Chris Smith, and he is great, by the way. Folks, yeah, I'm going to have Mr. Pallone, who's the former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, now ranking member and a very good friend, wonderful, wonderful individual, a very effective member of Congress. I'm going to have him ask any questions or make a statement if he'd like. Please, I yield to you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Bilirakis. I have a statement for the record that I'd like to submit, if I
Please,
could.
without objection. So,
But I do want to highlight some parts of it. I mean, I wasn't here for the whole panel, but I don't want to repeat anything that you have said. But I did want to highlight a few things. The witnesses and the members and witnesses have clearly stated that this is a man-made crisis purposely created by the Aliyev regime to severely worsen the quality of life for the people of Artsakh. And I want to make that clear. Aliyev has not been subtle about alluding to the Armenian genocide when discussing Artsakh and removing people from there, nor has he attempted to hide his ongoing deadly incursions into Armenia itself. And he is clearly taking premeditated steps to remove the indigenous Armenian population from Artsakh and depriving them of the opportunity to live freely, democratically, and with dignity in their land of their ancestors, which is a clear sign of what I would call ethnic cleansing that we can't ignore. And I point out also that this follows the pattern set forth by the unprovoked war by Azeri forces in 2020 that destroyed civilian infrastructure, left thousands of people dead, and displaced tens of thousands more from their homeland. But unfortunately, at the time, little was done to hold Azerbaijan accountable, which is a pattern that has continued in the months and years that followed. And I heard Senator Brownback, I can't help but call you Senator, point out that if we don't do something, they're just going to continue to do the same. And that's the pattern here. He felt, Aliyev, that he could get away with this blockade, you know, and he's not going to reopen the Lachin corridor because unless we do something to force him to do that. Now, you know, I'm not going to get into the documented evidence that of the tragic effect of this blockade on innocent civilians. I mean, and the fact that it continues. But I think that, again, the many statements of disappointment and concern by international leaders has not halted Aliyev's deadly campaign or his continued sable rattling. I mean, it's what's I think particularly is unfortunate is that he's actually sending his own minister and talking about having some kind of settlement over the the demarcation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but continues this deadly campaign as he continues to meet. Even my understanding is the two countries are going to be meeting here in the United States in the next few weeks to talk about settling the territorial disputes between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But at the same time, he continues to force this blockade and displace or attempt to displace more people in Artsakh. So I think that the only thing that has to be done here is that the United States has to leverage every diplomatic tool at its disposal, including sanctions, to finally bring some pressure on Aliyev to stop, to continue this blockade in Lachin. And I do think that our country has a critical role in bringing these aggressions and expansionist behavior to the end. You know, we talked about other countries, Russia, other countries, but I think we're the key. If we don't do something, then nothing's going to happen, and this blockade is going to continue, and the effort to try to remove the Armenians from Artsakh is only going to continue. So, and again, as discussions between Armenia and Azerbaijan are reportedly set to resume here in Washington as early as next week, I have to call on our administration to take every action necessary to prevent Azerbaijan's militaristic behavior from dictating the terms of a final agreement. That's the other thing. In other words, if we do have a final agreement between the two countries, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think what he's trying to do here is to make the displacement and the elimination of Artsakh as a fait accompli, and so it's become a diplomatic leverage point, if you will, in those negotiations, which is why we continue to see the blockade. So I just want to say, on behalf of the and here, my colleague, Mr. Bilirakis, I was the founder and continue to be the co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Armenia. I want to thank everyone. Mr. Bilirakis is also one of our co-chairs. I appreciate what the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission is doing here. I think this is very important. And we in the Armenia Caucus, which is bipartisan, stand ready to do whatever we can with the information and the suggestions that are being made by the commission. So thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I thank the ranking member, and I appreciate you allowing me to work with you side by side on these issues affecting the Eastern Mediterranean and, of course, the Caucasus, Greece, Cyprus, of course, and Armenia, very dear to our hearts. And I appreciate seeing not my fellow cousins, because I'm a Greek American, in this room. There's not even a seat that's vacant, standing room only, and it really makes a difference when you come up to Washington, D.C. And to have the panel, these distinguished presenters, and I am a little partial to Ambassador Brownback. He did an outstanding job and excellent presentation, sir. Of course, I couldn't have said it myself. I'd like to see you as the next Secretary of State in the next administration, because I know things will get done. The right thing will happen. The F-16s, folks. I mean, here that's another example, and thank you, sir, for bringing that up. We shouldn't be selling F-16s to Turkey. There's so many reasons why not, and yet we're on the verge of doing that. Now, I really implore you to contact the leaders in the Foreign Affairs Committee, even the Armed Services Committee, both in the House and in the Senate. You have a friend in Menendez, there's no question. He's married to an Armenian woman, I understand. But the others are kind of on the fence, and you can make a difference, and it has to be approved by Congress. So I just don't get it, Ambassador. I don't get it. I don't get it. What is in it for us, the United States of America, first of all, but our allies in that particular region? We've got to prevent that from happening. Again, take Erdogan, just like the gentleman said here, Mr. Phillips, take Erdogan for his word. Take Erdogan for his word. The rhetoric that's coming out of Turkey is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned as a United States citizen. So I do have some remarks, if that's okay with y'all. I have some prepared remarks. For over half a year, Azerbaijan has enforced an extended blockade of the Lantos corridor. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. In violation of the 2020 ceasefire, I never had a problem with it until now. Azerbaijan has intentionally created an ever-growing humanitarian crisis by preventing the movement of food, fuel, medicine, supplies, and electricity to Artsakh. That's 120,000 people trapped and subject to a systematic effort by the Azerbaijani government to delegitimize and depopulate the ethnically Armenian Republic of Artsakh. And, you know, the history, like you said, the first Christian nation. It's not going to go, folks, they did it in Asia Minor with my people. And it's still going on. How many Christians are left in Turkey? Maybe 2,000, 2,500 Armenian Christians, Greek Christians, Jews, very, very few. And this is, they're discouraging these people. They're encouraging them to leave their homeland. It's what's happening. So, folks, we're seeing history repeat itself. That was another reason why I was so very happy to be actually the Republican co-sponsor, the primary co-sponsor of the Armenian Genocide Resolution. History is repeating itself. Coordinated Turkic and genocidal efforts to cleanse Armenians from their native lands. While we can't change the past, we must act now to stop another Armenian genocide. I appreciate the testimony from this esteemed panel and the calls for an end to the Section 907 waiver of the Freedom Support Act, which would prohibit the sale of military equipment to Azerbaijan. You're selling it to Azerbaijan, it's just like selling it to Turkey. There's no justifiable reason to continue this waiver when Azerbaijan has clearly used this equipment to wage an aggressive war against Armenia, commit war crimes against innocent Armenians, and enforce the current blockade. This is terrible what's happening in this day and age. As a co-chair of the Armenian caucus, and we have our leader here on the left, I have campaigned with the caucus for years to end the presidential waiver, and I will continue until the United States can guarantee that no American-bought resources will be used to perpetuate humanitarian crisis, genocidal campaigns, or target the innocent. And that's what's happening right now, folks. This is also very personal to me, as I said, as a Greek American and Orthodox Christian, a fellow Orthodox Christian. I view the Armenian people as my brothers and sisters, my cousins, in some cases, in faith, with a shared cultural heritage. Similarly, Greece and Armenia have both been victims of Turkey's aggression and destabilization. That's why we have to work together, folks. We're powerful when we're united and we work together for the same cause. So I have a question for Mr. Phillips. I appreciated in your testimony Turkey's culpability and steps Congress and the U.S. government should take regarding Turkey's destabilization, again, the destabilizing actions. What I wanted to ask the panel, and I could start with Mr. Phillips, and if the panel would comment, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so I wanted to elaborate more on Turkey's liability as it pertains to the horrific human rights abuses against ethnic Armenians since 2020, and then any additional actions the U.S. can take to hold Turkey accountable. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity. We'll start with Mr. Phillips, and anyone else who would like to comment and respond, we'd appreciate it very much.
When we look at Turkey's actions over the past 7 years, it seems as though Erdogan has released his inner Stalin. 150,000 people have been discharged from their duties. Many police officers and members of the armed services are either in jail or now unemployed. We should document that for the international community and for our own purposes so that Erdogan's track record of abuse is known to us all. We should also recognize that Turkey uses its NATO membership as a free pass. If Turkey applied to join NATO today, its application would be just thrown in the rubbish bin. It doesn't qualify for NATO membership because it's anti-democratic, it's hostile to human rights, and it works against U.S. interests. Here I'd like to mention the Kurds of Syria. 11,000 have been killed, 24,000 injured, fighting at our behest against the Islamic State. And we just turned a blind eye to that. Little appreciation, certainly no thank you. That's the bottom line. And the world watches and they see how we have behaved in Syria, and it undermines our credibility worldwide.
What about Cyprus being occupied for all these years? The northern part of Cyprus, the occupied territories, is another NATO nation. It's illegal, and we turn a blind eye to it. Thank you, sir. Yes, please. If you'd like to comment, please.
I would simply associate myself with David's remarks. I think it is very difficult right now to bring attention to this problem in the South Caucasus, precisely on account of the war in Ukraine and the fact that everything is being brought into play against Russia. And that's making it difficult, I'm sure, for the State Department and the administration. Let's hope that situation can be brought to a peaceful close soon. Thank you.
Congressman, I was involved when Andrew Brunson had been taken as really a political prisoner by Turkey. They wanted Gulen sent back to Turkey from the United States, who is in sanctuary in the United States. And Turkey just kind of, they'd listen to us, wouldn't do anything. It wasn't until the president threatened to put sanctions on steel tariffs and does this, and Andrew Brunson becomes the most expensive political prisoner in the world, that he gets free.
Exactly.
So I think, this is what they understand is something that actually pops them. And I think you got to look at doing something like putting tariffs on steel exports from Turkey and say this is, if you're going to continue to do this and back this in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, we're going to put these tariffs on. If that's what you're going to do and strangle and starve out this 120,000 people, that's the only thing they'll react to, that they'll respond to, is something of that nature.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rubin, would you like to comment also on the, if you want to elaborate on the F-16s, we'd appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. First of all, it's important to recognize that the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war was an inspiration for Russia's renewed invasion of Ukraine. The fact that Aliyev was able to get away with force and changing borders in that way is something which Putin certainly observed and internalized. When it comes to the F-16s more broadly, and how it relates both to Turkey and to the peace in the South Caucasus, it's important to calibrate U.S. policy to reality rather than wishful thinking. It's important to calibrate U.S. policy to the present rather than the record of the past. The fact is that while Azerbaijan might be important for Ukraine, Azerbaijan, like Turkey, is playing both sides of the issue. It's become one of the biggest sanctions busting tools which Russia has. When it comes to the F-16s, and Turkey is a NATO ally, let's not forget that under 20 years of Erdoganism, more than 30 million Turkish school children have been indoctrinated from kindergarten through 12th grade. Let's not forget that the entirety of the Turkish military has been remade in Erdogan's image. Now, Turkey often says, and the State Department will repeat, that Turkey has the second largest number of men under arms in NATO, and therefore making Turkey happy and the F-16s to Turkey are just too important to walk away from. It's always a horrible thing to try to make democracies pay concessions to appease dictators. But the fact that Turkey has the second most men under arms in NATO is irrelevant, because it doesn't matter how many troops you have under arms. What matters is how many of those the government is willing to use in the service of NATO. And when it comes to Turkey, they're simply not on the same page anymore. The fact of the matter is the F-16s, which Erdogan demands, are more likely to be used against Iraq, against northern Syria, against perhaps Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, as they were during the 2020 war. They're overflying Aegean islands that are owned by Greece and are fully Greek sovereign. The fact of the matter is, it's a far greater threat to stability in the region to give F-16s to Turkey now, because they could be utilized in an intra-NATO war with Greece, than any advantage they would have in terms of unity vis-a-vis Russia. If Turkey wanted to show its unity vis-a-vis Russia, it would lift its hold on Swedish NATO membership. Again, and just in conclusion, we've got to calibrate our diplomatic and our military strategy to reality rather than wishful thinking. Unfortunately, this is not yet the case.
Couldn't agree more. You said it all right there. Folks, I have a couple more questions, and I know that the chairman will be back if he possibly can. So the one question is for the panel, for Mr. Rubin, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Evans, actually. And if the ambassador wants to chime in, he's certainly welcome. It is important, a matter of life and death, for Armenians that we come to an accurate judgment about Azerbaijani intentions. What evidence in words and deeds? Why does the administration not give these disturbing signs adequate weights? And I know you kind of discussed this, but please elaborate if you wish. We'll start with Mr. Rubin.
Thank you very much. What I would say is that, Ilham, we need to recognize that the root of the dispute at this point in time is not simply a result of grievance over a land dispute with regard to Nagorno-Karabakh. It's an ideological dispute. It's the irredentism which Ilham Aliyev is now embracing, in which he not only will say that all of Nagorno-Karabakh should be under Azerbaijani sovereignty, no questions asked. But he will also say, and I know, for example, the Armenian Association of America and other groups have created lists of these examples, that Yerevan is historically Azerbaijani. That's like Turkey now saying Athens is historically Turkish. No one is anti-Turkish in this room or in the US government. No one is anti-Turkish necessarily in the region. What everyone wants is the same goal: a Turkey willing to live at peace with itself within its borders. And the same thing is true with regard to Azerbaijan. We need to nip Ilham Aliyev's irredentism in the bud. Any sort of wobbliness is simply encouraging greater instability down the line. We don't want to sacrifice long-term stability. We don't want to have long-term instability for the convenience of a short-term promise of peace in our time.
Very good. Mr. Evans, would you like to comment, sir?
I couldn't say it any better than Michael did there.
I agree. Yeah, pretty amazing. Well, we have Mr. Phillips, and if you'd like to comment, we'd appreciate that, sir.
So during the first days of October, we launched a documentation project on Azerbaijani atrocities and terrorist activities. We have exhaustive information, including statements, profiles of commanders. This is the kind of work that the U.S. government should have done. We stepped in and did it, and we have a volume of information that would be extremely useful to members of Congress and other human rights advocates. We'll be more than happy to make it available to you and your colleagues. Let me also state that when I chaired the Turkey-Armenia Reconciliation Commission, what Turks would repeat like a mantra is, we will never act under duress. Well, what we learned from dialogue over 3 years is that Turks only act under duress. And if you don't keep the pressure on them, if you don't show them what duress means and exact a price for their crimes, they'll continue to do what they have been doing. The same can be said of Aliyev in Azerbaijan. So it's time for some tough love.
Exactly. And you brought the example that the ambassador gave with Pastor Brunson.
That's the only thing that got things
That's
moving.
what they understand. I spoke to President Trump about this prior to on the Air Force One, prior to the sanctions, and it works. It works. We want them to be our allies. We want them, and we need them. If they act properly and are good allies, and true allies, NATO allies. So, in any case, I have another question here, and this is for Mr. Rubin and anyone else who would like to comment. Since the administration has already engaged as a leading party in the discussions over the future of Nagorno-Karabakh, does this not mean it has taken on some responsibility for the result? That is, if the result is tragic, will the administration bear responsibility? Mr. Rubin, please.
This is very brief. Certainly, all U.S. diplomacy should occur through the filter of responsibility. We don't want to be party to an irresponsible agreement. We don't want to be party to an agreement of convenience that might look good on paper, but doesn't have a chance to actually bring peace to the region. I think we just need to see the biggest picture here, which is, if after Armenia, what Russia is doing right now, considering that Russia is one of our top adversaries, is symbolically showing that if you choose democracy, as Azerbaijan flirted with in the 1990s, as Georgia embraced in 2008, and as Armenia embraced in 2018, that if you choose democracy, fine, but you're going to lose a third of your territory. We don't want to assist Russia in sending the signal to the peoples of the region, which is why it's essential that we begin to reward democracy. We begin to reward countries, recognized or not, that are doing the right thing, rather than acting in the service of dictatorships, which, again, according to Freedom House, have even less freedom than Russia today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, could,
Yes.
well, I was just going to say, this point really bears working on. My first bill that I put forward was working in Central Asia primarily. And what you would see taking place is, as these places would kind of flirt with democracy and open societies, which is what we want, that's what we support, we think people thrive the most in that type of setting, the Russians would initially at that time just kind of do everything they could to be subversive of that. And now it's not even in a subversive fashion, it's just overt, that they want to quash any sort of democratic tendencies. Well, that's what you're seeing now take place in Armenia. is you've got some open society movements taking place. And then what did the Russians do? They pull back. The Lechen corridor gets shut down. And so that, to me, says we've got to step in more aggressively than when the Russians are trying to quash a nascent democratic movement. And that we bear more responsibility because they're used to our response being, well, okay, they tried and it didn't quite make it, and we'll just go on some other place in the world and try to do good. No, that just sends the wrong signal. That means we need to step up more and try to help with those tendencies. And whether it's working with people and building their economy, whether it's helping them with military systems in Armenia, I think these are things that we ought to open up to in the thrust of a broader discussion about supporting democracy in face of a Russian aggressive response against it.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Anyone else want to comment?
Yes,
sir.
please.
Yes, sir.
So there is a doctrine that was adopted by a majority of countries in the UN General Assembly called the responsibility to protect. That gives cover to the United States and anyone else who wants to intervene to save innocence. We should look at the responsibility to protect. It's known by R2P. We should exert it as a way of saving people from aggression. There is a body of international law that exists. It just hasn't been used. We have to demonstrate that we're capable of giving it life and enforcing it and bringing to bear the full power and values of the United States in service of humanitarian action.
Excellent. That leads to my next question. Has Azerbaijan treated Armenian cultural and heritage in Azerbaijan and territories occupied? What do you think would happen to centuries of Armenian cultural and religious heritage if the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh are forced to evacuate? I know what's happened in the northern part of Cyprus, the occupied territory, and in Turkey as well. But I want to give the priests and the clergy so much credit because you said that these customs and traditions and of course the state has survived all these centuries, and I believe it's because of the influence of the clergy, and we appreciate you so very much. Thank you for being here too. It really means a lot, and you have so much influence in our communities, and I appreciate you stepping into the arena and not going back because I know you care so very much, and this is very important. It's vital. So if someone can answer that question with regard to the cultural and religious artifacts, what do you think might happen? What's going on now?
Simply put, they would be destroyed. Armenian culture would be whitewashed. Armenian churches would be turned into mosques, as we've seen in Turkey. So we have to recognize that there's a very high price to pay for neglect, which is not only the disappearance of Armenian culture, but the values of tolerance and compassion that define Christianity and the Western world. It's important to be counted here in service of humankind. Preserving Armenian culture in Turkey and in Azerbaijan is critical to future progress.
Yeah, you know, these people, folks, again, it was said very well, and I can't add much more, but they want to be in their homeland. Of course, I guess the ambassador brought it up. Yeah, you have a nice life here in the United States, the greatest nation on the face of the earth, there's no question. You can practice your religion, your culture, your traditions, all your values. But these people want to be in their homeland under the right conditions. I mean, I see it everywhere I go. So in any case, I know that Mr. Rubin wants to add something, and then if there's anyone else with regard to that subject, please feel free.
Thank you, sir. I agree with what David said. I just want to point out one additional angle. My fellow co-panelists have mentioned at various times the Israel's actions and how they've contributed to the current difficulties in terms of provisions of military technology to Azerbaijan. We've also talked about the need for the United States to diplomatically convince Israel that perhaps it's not entirely in its interest to continue blind support for Azerbaijan. The issue of cultural heritage is one of those issues, those buttons we can press. Precedent matters. And so how can Israel expect the international community to rally behind it, to embrace the importance of preserving Jewish cultural heritage in the West Bank in the face of some Palestinian leaders who would like to see it entirely destroyed? If Israel is not contributing to the preservation of Armenian heritage in Nagorno-Karabakh, if Israel is siding blindly with a regime which denies the historical existence of Armenians on that land, despite archaeological, literary, and other historical evidence, it's setting a very dangerous precedent for itself. And when it comes to precedents, it's not just in terms of Israel and the protection of its own cultural heritage, of Jewish cultural heritage, but also with regard to the precedent of the need for defensible borders. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, please.
So as a Jewish American, I'm astonished by the fact that Israel refuses to recognize the Armenian genocide. That should change. That must change. If Israel is going to be a force for good in the world, it needs to be counted with the victims. To do otherwise is a betrayal of its own history.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would just point out that I think it's about 2020, that the Hagia Sophia in Turkey, at one point in time, the greatest church in Christendom, and an amazing building, absolutely amazing. You've probably been there.
Yeah.
I'm just stunned by it. President Erdogan changes into a mosque. What do you think will happen to the cultural sites within Armenia where that's your precedent, and that's the sort of bold step that had global implications that he's willing to take?
Yeah.
What do you think Azerbaijan, with Turkey's backing, is going to be willing to do in Armenia, where you're trying to create a pan-Turkic area? I think you're going to continue to see these cultural legacies just get destroyed or changed or altered. And this isn't good for anybody. This isn't good for Turkey or Azerbaijan either. I mean, people should recognize the cultural legacy and heritage that's here and honor it, and be willing to live there side by side with it in peace. That's the way forward for us as a world. Otherwise, what you're caught in is what we're getting caught in here, which is this clash of civilizations that Huntington wrote about, and that's what you're seeing taking place here. It's just not the route forward, and we've got to stand up and protect these sites so you don't get caught in a vicious cycle of these continued pushing and destruction back and forth of civilizations.
To your point, thank you, sir. To your point, sir, I believe you're the one that said it. Erdogan said that he was going to do this, and nobody believed him. He was going to turn Hagia Sophia into a mosque. No one believed him. And guess what happened? It happened in 2020. I was there in 2019. And so take him for what he says. Take his word for it. Again, no consequences whatsoever. No consequences whatsoever. Well, anyway, thank you very much. Does anyone else want to add to what was just said with regard to this subject? Well, I appreciate y'all very much. I guess Mr. Smith is not able to come back, Chairman Smith. So I think we've had a good discussion, and I appreciate the panel so very much. And thank all of you for being here. God bless you. And thank the priests because they're sticking their neck out for their homeland and their faith and their traditions. And we love you. Thank you so much. God bless. And this hearing is adjourned.